Today, a lot of a growing scandal, really. This is involving the Justice Minister here in France, Christiane Taubira.
That's right, and the right-wing press is really outraged about this. Let's start by looking at Le Figaro, which talks about how Taubira has really sparked a scandal here. Now, what is this about? Well, Taubira, who's a socialist, she's tried to evict the Paris Appeals Court prosecutor François Faletti for, quote, political incompatibility. Basically, he's right-wing. He was named under Sarkozy, and so she's trying to get him out of her hair, basically. But the right and legal unions are really outraged about this. How dare she try to use her power to get rid of a political opponent? According to Le Figaro, this has nothing to do with justice. This is really pure politics. And in fact, the leader of the UMP, Jean-François Copé, has called this a state scandal. Now, Le Figaro, in its editorial, really says that the government is hypocritical and intolerant because they're the first to say that the justice system should really be independent. And yet here's the justice minister trying to get rid of people who disagree with her ideologically to ensure support for her political reform. And Le Figaro says this is really a slippery slope that could lead to more government meddling in the future.
Now, Flo's also pulled out a piece from left-leaning Libération focusing on a very French trend involving elected officials.
That's right. Libération says that they're addicted to their mandate. France is a champion when it comes to elected officials hanging on to their jobs, especially in big cities. And so with municipal elections just around the corner, Libération takes a closer look at this very French trend, which according to Libération is a problem. In its editorial, it points out that you have some elected officials who have been around since the 1970s. It calls them mandate hoarders, people who are selfishly holding on to their power. And it means that there's hardly any turnover. So we're left with people who have old ideas, they're somewhat stale, etc. And on top of that, they develop some sort of favoritism with local businesses, etc. So it's kind of, Libération compares them to barons. Now, according to Libération, there's a real need for fresh faces, a real need for fresh blood. But the problem is that elected officials are quite happy about the situation, so it's not really in their interest to change things.
Christian paper Lacroix focusing on the Middle East today.
That's right. Lacroix focuses on the boycott that's worrying Israel. Now, according to Lacroix, there's a movement that's really gaining speed in European countries, and that's that more and more associations are calling on consumers to boycott Israeli businesses that have set up factories, etc., in occupied territories. And according to Lacroix, this is a real source of concern for the Israeli government. And in its editorial, Lacroix points out that these are grassroots movements that are a way of fighting against Israelis' settlements, which, according to critics, are illegal occupation. And this grassroots movement seems to be working because, according to Lacroix, investors are starting to pull out of a lot of Israeli companies, and the business world in Tel Aviv is getting agitated.
Now, moving on to a story that Stephen was telling us about yesterday. In fact, Italy is probing international credit rating agencies over a series of downgrades that hit the country. This is at the height of the Eurozone debt crisis.
That's right. You can read about it in Le Figaro. Italy accuses these rating agencies of ignoring its history, art, and landscape, which, according to Italy, is universally recognized as the basis of its economic strength. Basically, according to Le Figaro, these rating agencies were ignoring la dolce vita, and the government is actually asking for compensation, some 234 billion euros. So it could be good for the government, I guess. Le Monde, meanwhile, speaking of la dolce vita, but this time the 1960s Fellini film, well, Le Monde takes a look behind the scenes of this classic film, and especially the story that actually inspired the film, especially that very steamy scene at the Trevi Fountain. Well, turns out Fellini was inspired by the real-life story of a stripper, a Turkish belly dancer named Aisha Nana, and you can see a photo of her there in Le Monde. Now, she shot to fame when she performed a striptease at a restaurant in Rome in 1958, and this was captured in photos, including this one you can see right there, by paparazzi. Now, unfortunately, this was terrible for her career, and she really was forgotten, but she did inspire that Fellini film. But she died on January 29th, so that's why we're talking about her today.
Okay, well, nice to see the images as well. Flo, thanks very much. Flo will know with the papers here on France 24. Coming up, the very latest news. Sochi Games just getting underway, in fact. Plus, in focus, we're going to be reporting on an issue said to have affected up to 140 million women across the planet. Today is the International Day of Zero Tolerance to Female Genital Mutilation or Female Circumcision. A special report from Kenya coming up for you in focus.